through the whole thing. Right on cue. So if you can't stick around through the whole thing, it will be available online, and you can check it out later. Second, we've reserved about half of the time that's available for questions. We're in webinar mode, so you can submit your questions in the chat. We'll be keeping track of them and we'll respond after we complete the presentation portion of the webinar. Whether we get to all the questions or not, we will be including them in an FAQ document that will be posted online next week. Outside of those questions, if you have things that are very specific to your particular project, we're happy to talk with you one-on-one. Next slide, please. With that out of the way, I'd like to briefly introduce the Office of Rural Development, our programming and staff. The Office of Rural Development, or ORD as we call it for short, was created by Governor Whitmer last year through an executive order. The office, or the creation of the office, was a response to the unique challenges faced by rural communities and the importance of rural Michigan to the state's future success, as well as the need for a coordinated approach across state government to support rural solutions and investment. The creation of the office came with some funding for a grant program, as well as support for operations. I've been on board with the office since April of last year, and 3 additional staff, Peyton Hines, Policy Specialist, Lisa Miller, Engagement and Outreach Specialist, and Matt Wiedela, Capacity and Grant Program Specialist, joined in January of this year. The office functions as a cross-sector, cross-agency liaison, working closely both with a broad range of state agencies as well as rural stakeholders to ensure that there's a rural voice in decision-making around programs that impact rural communities. While we're housed within the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, we work closely with other agencies that are supporting rural communities with programming that addresses rural challenges like housing, broadband, infrastructure, and more. To ensure that these agencies like MISHDA and LEO and MEDC, EGLE and MDOT are connected to and hearing from local and regional rural stakeholders, the ORD works to continually engage with rural communities so that we understand their priorities, their projects, needs, and opportunities. Next slide, please. So to that end, I've spent the last year listening to and working with rural stakeholders across the state. And wherever I go, I hear consistent themes. The challenges represented by an aging or declining population and a shrinking workforce, the need for housing, broadband, and childcare to attract people and workers to the communities that need them, and across the board, the need for additional capacity and resources to help communities respond to these big, expensive, complex challenges. What we see time and again is that the communities that have been successful in identifying and implementing solutions to needs like housing and broadband are the ones that have invested in planning and capacity and that have developed extensive and collaborative partnerships with other organizations and communities. We know that this works. We know that the more partners you have engaged in these challenges, the more assets and resources you're bringing to the table. But we also know that in order to do that, communities need the organizational infrastructure, plans, and capacity to support project development and pursue funding opportunities. Next slide, please. That's where the ORD is really focusing our work on developing that infrastructure planning and capacity. We've structured the office to ensure that there's a consistent rural lens on policy and program development across the state, but also to ensure that rural communities have more opportunities for engagement and partnership with each other and with state partners. One way we're doing that is through events, including virtual rural roundtables that allow rural stakeholders to connect with peers to learn more about best practices and successes on topics across the state. Our first roundtable is April 26th, and we'll focus on housing capacity. We'll be dropping a link to registration for that webinar in the chat so that you can sign up and register for that. Outside of virtual events like the roundtables, we'll be working with local and regional stakeholders to plan in-person events this summer that will provide an opportunity for in-depth discussion and feedback on regionally identified priorities. In addition to these ongoing events, we'll be available as a partner to ensure that rural communities have the information and connections they need to pursue funding opportunities for their priority projects. And last but not least, why we're here today, we've developed the Rural Readiness Grant Program to support the capacity building, planning, and organizational frameworks that will help rural Michigan prepare for future investment and prosperity. Next slide, please. Before I turn it over to Matt Wiedela to get into the details on the grant itself, I'd like to share a little bit of information about the big picture background and goals of the Rural Readiness Grants. First, I want to say that this program is a direct response to the feedback we've heard from rural communities over the last year. So often, rural communities can't put forth competitive applications or don't even apply in the first place for important funding sources because there isn't the staff to coordinate applications and partners or to commit to long-term reporting down the road. What's more, there's often not even a shovel-ready project in the pipeline because there hasn't been the capacity to plan for bricks and mortar projects. The Rural Readiness Grant Program is intended to fill some of those gaps and build the plans, foundation, partnerships, and capacity for long-term rural success. We're looking to target communities that have the biggest gaps on that front. So while we have areas in 70 counties in the state that are eligible rural applicants, we're also considering not just whether communities are rural, but whether they've been underserved in terms of capacity, if they've lost population, or if they have large proportions of lower income households. Next slide, please. One thing you've probably noticed about the grant guidelines, if you've had the opportunity to check them out, is that the types of activities that might be covered by the grant are pretty broad. This is by design, and again, it's in response to feedback from all types of stakeholders that they need grant programs that are flexible and allow them to work with what they have and start from where they are. So we don't want to be too prescriptive, but we also know it can be difficult to put together an application when the sky's the limit in terms of what's possible. So to that end, we really want to focus on activities that build readiness in a few categories: cross-sector collaboration, development readiness, partnerships and planning, and rural capacity building. What these specific projects look like will vary by community to community, but a few examples based on ideas or projects that we've heard about from communities across the state include things like shared grant writers in the realm of rural capacity, infrastructure plans or master plans for specific neighborhoods, leadership development programs or fellowship programs, feasibility studies, pre-development work on a particular site, or support for cross-sector collaborations that will result in a new project or development on a priority issue. This isn't an all-inclusive list, and you might have ideas outside of what I've just mentioned or what we have on the screen here. So just a reminder that we're always happy to talk one-on-one about your particular project and how it might fit. And one final note on the program itself, we're trying to keep this process manageable for communities with limited capacity. So our initial application is a letter of intent that gives you an opportunity to share your concept without going through a labor-intensive application process. Again, always happy to talk with you about your particular ideas. So I just wanted to kind of kick things off with that broad brush background and history of the program and the intent of the grant. But I'm going to turn it over to Matt Wiedela, our capacity and grant specialist, who's going to walk us through the eligibility criteria and process before we get into questions. So just a quick reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll keep track of them as we go. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. First, we'll explain eligibility of the grants based on geography. We know that defining rural can be a challenge, so we're relying on a definition of rural used by some federal funding agencies that combines a couple of different measures of rurality. Under those parameters, eligible rural areas are non-metropolitan counties, which includes micropolitan statistical areas and metropolitan counties without any census-designated urban areas, as well as census tracts that are categorized as designations based on commuting patterns and the distance from major metropolitan areas as a way of understanding and identifying rural areas. Census tracts with RUCA codes between 4 and 10 are located farther distances from urban centers are considered rural. Using this definition, we have eligible rural areas in 70 counties in the state, including 59 non-metropolitan counties and another 11 counties that include eligible census tracts under the RUCA classification system. Within this slide here in the lower right-hand corner, the link can take you to information on the non-metropolitan counties and the census tracts, as well as additional information on the Rural Readiness Grant Program. To help you locate your community, we have tables showing the eligible counties and those counties with eligible census tracts. Again, you can refer to the hyperlink in the previous slide to find out specific information on census tracts if needed. If your community is not considered an eligible rural area, you can still apply if your organization partners with an organization or community in an eligible rural area, and if the project impacts an eligible rural area. You can click on the link in the lower right-hand corner of the previous slide for more information on eligible counties and census tracts, as previously mentioned. Similar to how we developed program criteria for eligible activities and eligible rural activities in the Rural Readiness Program, we developed a broad list of organizations that would be able to apply for these grant funds. As Sarah mentioned earlier, the Office of Rural Development highly encourages cross-sector collaboration and partnerships. This is why we've included tax-exempt organizations, nonprofits, including community foundations and statewide associations, local units of government, which include cities, villages, townships, and county governments, intermediate school districts and regional education service agencies, or RESAs, Michigan's 12 federally recognized tribes, educational institutions, including universities and community colleges, and regional planning agencies and economic or workforce development organizations. ORD encourages cross-sector collaboration and partnership due to the expertise and resources that outside organizations can bring to aid rural areas that wouldn't otherwise have the capacity or resources themselves. I'm now going to specifically cover the letter of intent, which is the first part of applying for funds through the Rural Readiness Grant Program. I'm certain that our participants on the call today have a lot of project ideas and concepts for bringing positive and transformative change to their communities. As Sarah mentioned, we designed the letter of intent without creating a labor-intensive application process, but we also wanted to ensure that applicants provide a clear purpose statement and bring focus to their proposed project. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is included on this slide, and if you have any questions, especially if you have any questions prior to submitting the letter of intent, I'm happy to help. Next up is budgeting and match. The maximum grant fund request is $50,000. Applicants must provide a 20% match. The match is 20% of the grant amount requested. So for instance, if you do request $50,000 in grant funds, the minimum match must be at least $10,000. We also realize that the match requirement can place a financial burden on organizations with limited financial resources. To that end, match can come in the form of cash, in-kind, or a combination thereof. And a couple of examples of in-kind match can include staff time or supplies and materials that are contributed to the proposed project. And a note on the letter of intent is that the match that you identify there is not necessarily set in stone. We understand that that's just a proposed project at this time. So you do not have to certify your matching funds on the letter of intent at that time. So here is the application timeline. And this is to give you a sense of the status of your application. Whether or not you receive an invitation to submit a full application after you have had your letter of intent reviewed, you'll receive guidance from us as to the status of the letter of intent and project resources regardless of the invitation status. After the full applications are submitted on August 3rd, we will be convening a joint evaluation committee that will help us make funding recommendations to MDARD's executive leadership. Grant awards and announcements are planned for Tuesday, September 26th. We will also be developing and sending out formal grant agreements between the Office of Rural Development and the successful grantee organizations. We've now reached the conclusion of our presentation, and the rest of our time is available for questions and answers. As Sarah mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you can't get your questions answered today, we'll also be posting an FAQ document online next week. For future rounds of funding, we'll be sending out several notifications, including via our ORD newsletter, which, if you haven't subscribed to it, I encourage you to do so, and you can find links to it on our ORD website. With that, we're ready to answer questions, so I'll turn it back over to Sarah. Thank you again.
Thank you, Matt. And looks like we already have a few questions to start with in the chat, and I'll just take those from the top. The first question was, what criteria do communities need to meet to receive services and grants? We just went through the eligibility criteria and some of the requirements around match. So those are the big ones to keep in mind. Eligible activities, eligible geographies, and other requirements like match are included in the grant guidelines, which is available on the ORD website. Is the slideshow available with access to the links being referenced. I couldn't follow. This is being recorded and it will be available on the ORD website along with the presentation itself and links to the eligibility map that was included on the slide. So hopefully that answers that question. And then the third question from Travis, is there any way to request possible exception to eligibility on the map? Example, village of Casanova is in the far northwest corner of Kent County, but is extremely rural. So this is a great question and one that we talked about a lot when we went through the eligibility criteria and the definition of eligible rural areas. And understand that anytime you draw a line, you're going to be leaving some communities out. I should say anytime you draw a line or create a definition, you're going to be leaving some communities out. So what we're doing is allowing communities that aren't included on that eligibility map to still apply if they're partnering with an organization or a community that is an eligible rural area. So that the village that you mentioned in the question could apply if it was a joint application with an organization or community that's included in that eligible rural area, and the impacts of the project address needs in those eligible rural areas. So we're trying to do a couple things with that caveat. One is acknowledge the existence of rural communities in metropolitan areas, and also trying to build capacity by connecting communities and encouraging collaboration. So hopefully that answers that question. The next question from Carrie, can you clarify what is meant by a reimbursement grant program and the guidelines? Can we seek funds for work that is already completed? So to clarify, reimbursement grant program, that means that the funds are a reimbursement for the work that you've completed under the grant. So you would pay for the activities included in the grant application, and we would reimburse you per a grant contract. We can't provide a grant for work that has already been completed outside of the grant program. So hopefully that clears that up. I think the majority of grants are probably reimbursement grants where under a grant contract, you complete specified activities, and the grant is provided once invoices and receipts are received, showing that the work was done for the grant according to the grant agreement. So that's what we're getting at there. Travis had a question on the total pot of funds available for this grant, and just want to say that because this is the first time we're offering and administering the program, we wanted to start out on the smaller side with an eye towards continuing growing and fine-tuning the program. So we're currently planning to award $500,000 in the first round based on available funding appropriated in the 2022-2023 budget, but we'll be making a final determination on total dollar amount available in the final application decisions in September. We'll be releasing future rounds. We'll be announcing the next round in the summer, and the funding available for future rounds might increase depending on future appropriations for the grant program. So that's where we're starting the process. Next question is, if we are awarded a planning grant, will we be given priority for future grants to implement the projects? I don't want to answer that definitively, but I would say not necessarily, partially because the primary goal of the grant program is to develop readiness rather than implementation. We had quite a bit of discussion about that, and one place that we've kind of ended with that is that while there are resources and programs available for bricks and mortar construction and implementation of projects, there's not as much funding available for planning and readiness related activities. So right now the focus is more on planning and capacity building that organizational framework and readiness for projects. Can a community receive more than one grant if there are multiple applicants? as an example, an ISD does one, a city government does another, et cetera. I think that's possible if I'm understanding the question correctly. So it's possible that multiple organizations within a community could submit for multiple grants. I think it's possible. I think what I might suggest is that we are really interested in seeing collaboration across organizations and communities. And so there's the potential that it might be a stronger application if those organizations work together. That's not saying that they have to, or that there's necessarily only one application that's going to be awarded. But would just like to emphasize that's really a goal that we're striving for, is to encourage that cross-sector collaboration. Are child care organizations available if it's a for-profit status currently? We have limited I shouldn't say we've limited the eligibility, but our application criteria right now is for tax-exempt organizations. So for-profit or a business would not qualify for the grant. But that's not to say that there's not the potential for partnerships with tax-exempt organizations that might make sense for a grant application. So that's something to think about, and maybe a question to follow up with us on one-on-one, just to see if there's an organization that might make sense to act as a partner for some of those applications. What are the requirements for the letter of intent, number of pages, font size, margins, et cetera? If you look at the grant guidelines, there is a very simple form. It's a little over 1 page, and there's not a minimum or maximum, but we are really trying to keep that short and to the point. I don't know if Matt has more information on font size, margins, et cetera. I don't think we're going to be too prescriptive in that. What we're really looking for is, are the questions answered? Do we understand what the concept is? And even in those cases, there's a potential we could reach back out with additional questions if there's not enough information for us to understand what's going on there. So we're not going to be real prescriptive with the length of the answers on that form. But just so you are aware, it is a really brief, simple form. Bree had a question. Would you mind giving a few more examples of types of projects? So a few, and I'll say these because they are ideas that I've heard expressed by different communities and different stakeholders that are kind of in the works, or that there's been a lot of interest in. One is helping to package properties for development. So conducting land assembly activities around a particular housing project in a community, doing the feasibility work or the market studies that are needed to attract investment to those key properties in a community. Another is a feasibility study for a community incubator. We've heard some talk about leadership development programs. We've heard communities talk about working with multiple organizations to hire a shared grant writer. We've heard interest in conducting planning for infrastructure needs within a particular neighborhood. So those are just a few examples. If there's something that you're thinking about and I didn't mention it, we're happy to talk through that with you and answer additional questions that you might have. But really just keep in mind, we're thinking about activities that are preparing your community or your organization for longer term solutions to big priority issues in your community. So planning, capacity development, developing organizational frameworks that will support those plans and projects, really trying to build that foundation for longer term solutions. Sarda had a question about how many grants we expect to award. We have, I mentioned earlier that right now we are planning on releasing about $500,000 for this first round, which if we maxed out all of the awards, that would give us about 10 grants. But we're really kind of waiting to see how many applications we get. And we're also, as I mentioned earlier, looking at announcing another round of funding in the summer. So if we're kind of inundated with really great grant applications, that $500,000 mark might be something that we're willing to be flexible on. But one of the reasons that we're starting with that number is that we want to make sure that one, communities have time to prepare for the application, and two, because it's the first time this grant has been offered, we want to make sure that we have all the kinks worked out, and that the process is really streamlined down the road. So are trying to keep that a little bit open. How long do grant recipients have to complete their program and use funds? It would be the end of next year. I think the grants need to be expended. Next question is, just to be completely clear, all communities in eligible counties are eligible. Yes, that is correct. Sarna had a question on whether this opportunity may be repeated in fiscal year 24. And yes, we do plan on releasing additional funds. We're announcing that next round in the summer. And if we receive additional appropriations down the road, we will continue to offer the program beyond fiscal year 24. This recording will be available after the presentation. I'm just running through the questions here. You can access that online on the ORD website. I'm in the city of Algonac in St. Clair County. We have an aging infrastructure that is a barrier to development. The results of our SAW grant suggested an infrastructure master plan. Is this eligible? Yes, that is eligible. Next question, is ORD staff available to meet with potential applicants to discuss project scope, especially applicants with limited capacity may need some back and forth on fleshing out a competitive project? Absolutely, we are available to meet with potential applicants and talk through ideas. Next question, can multiple entities apply to contribute to one larger intergovernmental project, for example, toward infrastructure expansion and upgrade? Yes. And we would encourage that. Again, we're really hoping to encourage collaboration here, and would love to see multi-jurisdictional, multi-organizational projects that show a lot of cooperation and collaboration. Christopher has a question about what if a project is ongoing. I think the devil's in the details on that one. If it's an element of a project that hasn't been funded, that might be something that's eligible, but we would have to kind of talk through some of the details on that to understand where in the process you are. I think I've answered the total funding question already. Thank you, Travis, for your comment on capacity building support. Can volunteer time be included as a match? Yes, it can be. There's another question on how long we have to spend the funding. When will funding be made available? As soon as work starts on the project, and you're able to provide receipts showing that those activities have been paid for, we'll be able to process reimbursement fairly quickly. I think Matt mentioned that we're looking to award the grants at the end of September. So depending on how long it takes to get a grant contract in place, we can work can start on the grants likely in October or November. Regarding hiring consultants for planning work, will that be required to be bid out if funded with this grant? We don't have specific procurement requirements written into the grant at the moment. I think that might be a question, a more detailed question that we would talk through around a specific project or application. If you, and I think if I may be reading into it too much, but it sounds like potentially you're already working with a consultant and already know who's going to be doing the project if you move forward. I don't think that's out of the question. Next question, after the LOI, letter of intent is submitted, will you send the full application? Yes. We will notify all applicants the status of their application, whether they've been selected to move forward with a full application. And if they are selected for that next round of consideration, we will provide the full application to those applicants. Next question, can a community apply for a grant with a concept? How worked out does the project need to be worked out to apply? Most grants tend to lean towards shovel ready, but this is intended for more planning. We would like to know what level of detail will be needed for the application. So this is a great question. And yes, you can apply with a concept, but I think as far as how cooked it needs to be in order to complete the application process, we do want to see that there's a lot of clarity and focus around the concept and the project. We are trying to support some of those planning, early phase development types activities. But I know that sometimes concepts can be pretty loose and still need a lot of organization around it to move forward. I think if you have questions about whether or not your project is ready for an application, again, I'm broken record here, but please feel free to reach out to us and talk through your idea. And we're happy to kind of workshop ideas with you as well. The other thing I would say that is, if this grant program has kind of triggered some ideas and so you have some concepts that have come about sort of as a response to this opportunity, just keep in mind that this isn't going to be the only opportunity to apply. We will be announcing another round of funding in the summer. And so the idea behind that is really to give people time to work through some of these concepts that might be new or developing. And so you have a little bit of time to think through, you know, the best way to structure a potential concept or project so that it's a stronger application down the road. Could a local political party collaborate with a community organization, et cetera? I'll be honest, I don't have an answer to that question. We'll have to probably check into that. We love to see collaboration, but I'm not sure where political parties fall in our tax exempt organization list as far as eligible applicants. So we can look into that, and or you can follow up with us with some more specifics on your particular project to see if that's appropriate. Would the creation of a landlord organization be eligible? I think we would need more details about what that is and what the goals of that organization would be. I think again, one of the previous questions was about for-profit applicants. This is for tax exempt organizations. I think if the organization was not intended to be for-profit, and if there was an outcome or a goal for the organization that would address key community priorities, then potentially it would be an eligible project. Next question, we want to repair roads. If we ask for too much, can you offer a smaller amount? This grant is intended to focus on planning and readiness rather than bricks and mortar projects. So if what you're looking for is planning work around road repairs or design or engineering, then potentially that's eligible. But we are kind of staying away from implementation, again, because there are agencies and programs that are that have or are developing funding sources to address those needs. As far as the question on whether we ask for too much, can we offer a smaller amount? There is the potential that we could negotiate with some applications or some applicants for a reduced amount. Next question, when collaborating with another organization, can organization A and organization B apply individually with the funding used for the same project? Each request $50K to add $100K to the overall project. I think that's possible. Again, I think it's probably a stronger application if there's collaboration between those organizations. We have a limited amount of grant funding, so again, I don't want to be declarative or definitive, but I think it would be unlikely that we would award 2 grants to a single project. And if 2 organizations are collaborating on a single project, it's going to be a stronger application if that collaboration is shown within the application. You just told Algonac that yes, they're eligible, but they're in St. Clair County, which is white on the map. So my apologies on that. I didn't know their specific geography or their eligibility, but I would take the opportunity to emphasize that communities are eligible to apply, even if they're in a white area on the map, if they are applying in collaboration and partnership with an organization or community that is located in an eligible rural area. So if Algonac is working with another community that is in an eligible rural area, then yes, they are still eligible to apply. Regarding the question about multiple entities applying to contribute to one larger project, in that case, the max amount is still $50K. Or could multiple applicants each apply for $50K for a shared project, thus increasing the request for the project? So it would be, again, we're really looking for collaboration. We're probably not going to award multiple grants to a single project. So if you have multiple organizations working on the same project, I would encourage a collaborative or joint application. I think if we had an unlimited supply of funding and not a lot of demand for the program, then maybe that would be something to talk about. But we're really looking at encouraging collaboration and really trying to keep in mind that we are expecting to see a strong demand for the program and have a limited amount of funds. Next question, how are grantees selected? Is there a scoring system or other criteria to keep in mind when choosing your project to apply for? Yes, there is a scoring system, and that's included in the grant guidelines, which I would encourage you to check out on the ORD website. Next question, I'm a new member of our council. Who do I contact first to get more information on how to proceed if I'm not in an eligible county? Matt Wiedela, our Capacity and Grant Program Specialist, would be able to work with you on that question. His contact information is available on the screen. Next question, how long would we have to apply for reimbursement? What is the length of time that grant activities would need to be completed? I think you can apply for reimbursement as the project moves along. We can talk more about your specific needs and timing, but once we receive a request for reimbursement, we can process those within a month. For the letter of intent, should we include letters of support as co-applicant partner organizations? I don't think we have that requirement in the letter of intent, but I think naming those co-applicants would be helpful to have in the letter of intent. The letters of support will be required as part of the full application. Next question, it was said that projects already working with the consultants would be acceptable, but to clarify, no work done before the contract is signed is reimbursable, but is eligible for match. So if I'm reading the question correctly, to clarify, no work done before the contract is signed is reimbursable. That is correct. Whether it's eligible for match, I think, again, that's going to be a question specific to the project and the timing and phasing of the project. So without getting into, there's I think, probably some specifics that we would have to get more details on before we could answer that question definitively. So again, I would encourage you to reach out with questions on your specific project. Will the summer round be for grants of the same max amount? At this point, yes, we're looking at the same sort of structure, but like I mentioned earlier, we're really kind of looking to see how this program is received, what the demand is, what the needs are, and adjusting kind of as we move through it. There's a question about an infrastructure whether an infrastructure master plan would be eligible. The answer to that is yes. And final question, when will the webinar and FAQs be posted on the website? Next week, I believe. Next question, can one organization working in multiple rural areas apply in multiple grants with different regional partners? For example, Otsego with X partners and Y organization, and then Lake with Z partners and Y organization. I think the answer is yes. If I'm understanding this correctly, yes, if you have multiple partners, I'm sorry, if you're acting as a partner in multiple projects, you can still apply in those multiple projects. I'm not sure I'm completely understanding the question, but we do anticipate, because we know we have partners who are regional and provide some capacity to multiple counties on multiple projects, that they may appear in multiple applications because of their partnerships with those counties. So I do think that I do think that that's a yes on that question. Okay, thanks, Kara. I think I've gone through them all. If I've missed any, Matt, if you'd like to flag them, or if there's any that you think we could clarify a little bit better, I'm happy to do that. But I'll leave it open for another minute or so and see if there's any additional questions that come through. And I think you've heard me you've all heard me say this a number of times, but if you have really specific questions, or even just need a little bit of additional clarity on what we're looking for, or whether your project is ready, we're more than happy to talk through with you about how it fits into the program guidelines and the process. Okay.
Oh, it looks like we got a few more questions.
Okay, I just saw them come through. So what types of partnerships are preferred? We just love partnerships. So I'm not, again, don't want to be real prescriptive. We know that different communities have different types of relationships between organizations. And so, you know, in some cases, an economic development organization and a local government might be working together really closely on a particular project. In other cases, it might be a nonprofit and a community foundation along with a local unit of government. Some cases it's a school acting as a lead partner. We're really not going to be prescriptive on that, because we know that different communities are driven by different types of relationships and want to be open to that. Next question from Jerry: is equitable geographic distribution throughout the state a factor? I don't see that addressed in scoring. And that's a great question. What I'll say is that we're really targeting, as I mentioned, those communities that have had, that have been essentially underserved in terms of capacity in the past, those that have lower incomes, and those that have experienced population decline over the last 10 years, because we see those communities as, and I think have a lot of experience with those communities having less capacity to build the types of projects that they need to address their local and regional priorities. So we've kind of built that into the guidelines to identify those higher need communities. So we're not structuring it around geographic equity as such, but we are looking at equity in a more general way around and focused around need.
Sarah, there was a question, there was a bit of a glitch and came from Mary, and it says, if we provide regional services to 10 counties, can we be the applicant, or does that need to be county specific?
No, the regional organization is able to act as the applicant. Next question is, ORD staff available to present to our local human services collaborative body? I think so, just depending on the timing. And please just feel free to reach out with that request. Next question, are you focused primarily on planning for rural economic development, or are projects focused on conservation, land use, and/or climate resiliency planning also welcome? Yes, absolutely. I think maybe some of the projects that I mentioned might have had a kind of an economic development slant, but we're really looking for projects that address locally and regionally identified priorities. And so we know that that's in some cases going to be conservation, land use, and resiliency planning focused as well. So thanks for that question. Absolutely. We're trying to keep an open mind and, again, just be flexible with this grant program. Next question, how would reimbursement work with a position regarding your idea earlier about using the grant to hire a shared grant writer? That's a very project-specific question that I think we would probably have to have more conversation about. And it might be something that you want to think through as you're developing the concept or are submitting the letter of intent. What would be a workable structure for your project, basically. So I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but that's something that we can, again, talk more, and it might be something that as you put together the application, you get a sense of what exactly you would need in order to make that work. Next question, without trying to inundate your staff with dozens of letters of intent per county with different projects and organizations, I think I'm hearing that you might use this phase to initiate further programs. So at this stage, would you encourage all letters and project ideas? Thank you for that question, Andrea, and for trying to not overwhelm us. So one of the earlier questions was about, would we accept letters of intent for just a concept that's not, as fully developed? And I would say that I would go back to that question in response to this one and say that if there is the germ of an idea or a developing concept, that you might want to take the next few months to work through some of those bigger philosophical and organizational questions that you might have around that great idea that you've come up with, and then keep an eye towards the next funding round so that when you do submit an application or a letter of intent, that it's more focused, that there's more clarity, that it's ready for funding. But again, and someone else made the comment or asked the question about some communities or some organizations might need some kind of coaching in order to get their projects fully ready and fleshed out. And we are happy to help in those conversations. So if you at the risk of sounding like a broken record, if you have questions, we have this idea that we think it will work, but we're not exactly sure how, feel free to reach out to us. We want to see communities be successful, and we want to make sure that they feel ready and that they are ready for funding opportunities down the road. And so that's part of the goal of this process, is to help develop that readiness. Okay, thank you for the kind words, Dennis. Mary's question, can the project span multiple counties? Absolutely, yes. Again, we love collaboration. We love big picture thinking at the regional level. So it looks like just a few thank yous, and unless I've missed another question, I think we've covered. Oh, one more. Can we include other organizations that are broader in focus than the priority areas that we have identified? Yes. if I'm understanding that correctly. So you might be asking about, your project might be very narrowly focused on a particular topic, and you're thinking about bringing in an organization that has a bigger scope or a bigger vision. And I think absolutely that's appropriate. And it's probably worth saying that one of the hopes of this project is that this program is that we are able to connect partners within communities that will result in additional capacity. So if it's kind of a non-traditional organization in respect to that particular priority area, but they have more resources and they have more organizational capacity, I think that's a benefit to be able to kind of lift up some of the work that you're doing around another project that needs a little bit more support to move forward. Okay. I want to say thank you all for the kind words and for attending this morning. We really look forward to working with you all on this grant program. We're really excited to offer it. And I just, having talked with so many of you over the last year, I know that there's a lot of really great ideas out there and a lot of cool stuff happening. And so we're really excited to hopefully be a part of that and help you and your communities move forward with some of those great ideas. So really excited to get this out there and look forward to hearing more from you. But again, please don't ever hesitate to reach out with additional questions. So I'll stop there. I want to say thank you to Matt Wiedela for his work and support in getting this out there today, as well as George Noonan from MDARD, who's helping us with all of the technicalities of the webinar. So thanks for joining us today, George. And thank you all for participating. We'll have this posted on ORD website next week. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.